Welcome to the Everyday Conversion Podcast, the only 5-day-a-week podcast helping faithful members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have and foster daily gospel discussions with their families based on the Come Follow Me curriculum. I'm your host, Mark Sieverkrop, and it's important for me to tell you up front that the views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts of this podcast alone and do not represent the official doctrine and viewpoint of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With that in mind, let's jump right in with today's episode. Christ's questions to the disciples in Matthew chapter 13, verses 13 and 15, are as telling about others' beliefs, or lack thereof, as it is of the disciples' beliefs. Listen to this in verses 13 and 14. When Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, and some Elias, and others Jeremias or one of the prophets." But then he asked the disciples this question. He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And their testimony and the response to this question was unwavering. Verses 16 through 17. Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven." In these two questions and answers, we see the fallibility and confusion of mortal knowledge compared to the clear and constant North Star of revelation. Not only was this knowledge sure, it was deep and it was abiding, and it allowed the disciples to endure great hardships and trials throughout their lives for Jesus' sake. So my questions to you today are, earlier this week, I asked you to consider why you believe. Today, I ask you, how would you respond if Jesus was to ask you, "Whom say ye that I am?" And the second question is, what can you learn about strengthening your testimony from Christ's question to the disciples and Peter's response to that question? This idea of, revelation and the testimony of the Spirit and how strong that is was driven home to me at the end of my mission. I served my mission in upstate New York in the Utica mission, greatest mission in the world. But at the end of our mission, we had the opportunity to go to Palmyra and visit the Sacred Grove and visit the Grandin Building and the Hill Cumorah and the Joseph Smith Home and all of the church history sites there. It was just outside our mission, but they'd given approval, the area presidency had given approval for us to go at the end of our missions. So like most probably 21-year-old young men, I went. Well, not that went, but the way I responded to this situation was like most 21-year-old men. We got to the Sacred Grove, and we went into the Sacred Grove, and we all kind of went our own ways, and we got to just spend some time by ourselves in the quiet of the Sacred Grove. And this is where I was saying, like other 21-year-old young men, part of me expected a major spiritual experience. I'm like, wouldn't it be awesome if I could have an experience like Joseph Smith? If I could see a vision or have some burning in my bosom or something to know that what I've been teaching to so many people for the last 2 years was true. So I walked around. I spent some time quietly just enjoying the peace and thinking and pondering and considering my testimony and the things that I had learned and found to be true through the Spirit. And I didn't have a major spiritual experience. I didn't feel something overwhelming. I didn't see a light or hear a voice or anything like that. And at first it was kind of a letdown. But then I started thinking, and I had a thought, and I'm convinced that it was the Spirit speaking to me. I didn't hear a voice, but I had this thought in my mind very clearly. And the thought was, you don't need to be in the Sacred Grove to know this is true. You already knew it was true. You already knew that Joseph Smith saw God the Father and Jesus Christ in the Sacred Grove. You already knew that he was called to be a prophet, that he translated the Book of Mormon, that he restored and brought back the Savior's church. You already knew all of that, and you don't don't need to be in this place to know that. So the lack of a spiritual experience for me was an unbelievable spiritual experience that I have never forgotten since that day. That's the power of the Spirit. That's the power of what Peter experienced when he said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And that's the power of the Savior's response, saying that flesh and bone hasn't told you this, but my Father which is in heaven. The revelation, the Spirit teaching us, is the most powerful testimony that we can have. We don't have to have signs and wonders like the Pharisees were looking for earlier in this chapter. The Spirit is the most powerful testimony we can receive. So again, those two questions. How would you respond if Jesus asked you, "Whom say ye that I am?" And the second question, what can you learn about strengthening your testimony from Christ's question to the disciples and Peter's reply to that question? Thank you for listening to the Everyday Conversion Podcast. For transcripts and other bonus materials, as well as past episodes, be sure to visit everydayconversion.com. And if you haven't yet, be sure to leave us a rating and review on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening platform. This episode was a production of the Everyday Conversion Podcast, and while we are faithful members of the church, the views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts of this podcast alone and do not represent the official doctrine and viewpoint of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For official doctrine and viewpoints of the church, please visit lds.org